This movie's bigger, much more ambitious.
Soldado is Sicario on steroids. It's about the government and about the bigger terrorism canvas.
It doesn't try and copy what existed. It became its own entity.
It's fast-paced. It has more action.
What I loved most was making higher the bar of everything.
The most daunting thing was, with the success of Sicario, we wanted to make sure that we lived up to that. And then telling another chapter of that story, carries its own challenges.
The process of finding a director was another issue, because we were hoping that Denny would come back, and Denny had an interest in coming back, but Denny had a commitment to another film.
Denis brought a lot of his guys with him. Roger Deakins, who got nominated for an Oscar on Sicario. And so we had to kind of step it up and bring a new group in that sent a signal that we're not compromising.
We were so lucky to come across Stefano Sollima. He's an Italian filmmaker. We became familiar with him with a series he directed called Gomorrah, which is amazing.
The way he was able to convey the humanity, but the seriousness of these Italian mobsters and the mafia, it just felt like he had his finger on the pulse of what we were trying to do.
He's attracted to really dark subject matter. He's a great visionary filmmaker and storyteller.
You did this sort of thing in the Middle East. Do you think those tactics will work here?
If you wanted to, sir.
In Soldado, I loved the setup. That was a really contemporary and also delicate issue. It's the immigration, the border between US and Mexico. And then I loved how he pushed their character over their limits. So I felt that was so incredibly rich that it was impossible not to direct.
Light dust on the front, because they're going to be putting a lot of dust on it anyway.
Darius Wolski is one of the great DPs working today, who not only has done interesting, moody stuff like, Dark City, but has done The Martian and big movies, and he just understands the aesthetic of what we were going for.
I was working with Ridley Scott on Alien Covenant, and ironically, he used to come to the set telling me, listen, there's an amazing Italian show called Gomorrah. And by the end of the movie, I got a call to read the script for the sequel of Sicario, the movie that I respected tremendously.
Darius Wolski is a genius. So I don't think it was necessary to try to replicate Sicario. And then I think a more edgy photography and look.
You want to be respectful of what they've done, and I think we were, but at the same time, you want to take it to your own level. So there's this fine line. My work is a little bit more spontaneous, and if I do something absolutely perfect, then I just look at how to mess it up.
Soldado is a much more fractured story, and Darius Wolski had the style that was a natural progression for Soldado.
As a cinematographer, you take the script, you look at all the dramatic points, you look at what inspires you. You always try to give justice to the location, and in the same time keep the overall look somehow consistent.
I always film in a location because you're going to feel the authenticity, the reality around you. Even with small details, like Soldado is a story in the border, so it was, of course, impossible not to go there in the desert and shoot really close to the border to get the real feeling of our story.
From a creative perspective, I find it really important to start getting into the brain of the director. When he reads these particular locations, what is he reading about them emotionally, and how are they going to tie into what the characters are experiencing? Stefano was very surprised at the vastness of what we have here. The American Southwest, these extraordinary mountains that go into vast desert, and with the fact that we have long, straight roads that go for miles. So I knew he was going for these extraordinarily wide, open shots.
I think being on location gives it a scope of sorts, gives it a depth that you can't buy or recreate. There's something about a location that might help the texture of the film, the believability of the moment.
There's something about a foreign perspective on America that works. Stefano has an awe of Americana and what that is, and I think he was able to bring something unique to it.
I gotta get you north.
What was fascinating about it all is to see how the landscape started to inform the narrative. This is very much an exterior movie with really dramatic images. And it works perfectly for the storyline because a lot of this is about how do people, when they're trying to cross from one country to another, legally, illegally, covertly, how do they make that process happen? And so in that sense, showing just how difficult it is and how vast it is critical to the actual narrative.
Buenos días, americanos del futuro. ¿Cómo estamos? ¿Ah? ¿Ya pagaron todos? ¿Y usted?
Por los dos.
1000 cada uno.
The research I did for this movie was the way immigrants and coyotes and how people come across the border and their different ways of transporting people across the border. So we met with DEA agents who live along the border of Mexico and America, and we had conversations about what it was like 10 years ago, what it's like now.
This is Omaha 4-4 on heading 158 to Laredo.
The border patrol had been beefed up. You have more surveillance type equipment, more aircraft to monitor the border.
Stefano wanted to focus on how locations play an incredible role in how you get across that message. But also, I think he was looking for a lot of the same detail that we had in Sicario.
It was a world that we established in Sicario that we wanted to carry over to Soldado, but at the same time, we didn't want to repeat ourselves.
Ya llegamos.
Soldado definitely has that same hard-bitten, rough and tough, sparse atmosphere, but it's just on a much larger canvas.
We try to paint a really authentic portrayal of the cartels and the violence and intensity and sort of let audiences have a visceral experience in that world.
This would have been a lot easier taking her in the house. Could get real sloppy on the street.
Slop is good. Sloppy makes it look like the cartel did it.
When Alejandro and Matt arrive in Mexico City and they have this incredible kidnapping plot, we are on the streets of Mexico City, and I really think it shows kind of the scope of just how big, how colorful Mexico City is.
Isabel is being kidnapped on her way back from her private school. We closed down a 2-block section of downtown Mexico City, and we have a big ambush kidnapping sequence, action sequence.
We have chosen a location that is a bustling area, just to amp up the stakes in the story, just so you can really feel the vibe of the city.
You'll find a lot of different architecture, lots of people, a lot of street vendors, a lot of shops, and we really wanted to show that craziness and madness of Mexico City.
A message to our attackers. Your bombs do not terrify us. They empower us to send you something that is truly terrifying. The full weight of the United States military.
This movie definitely feels bigger than Sicario. We're not just in the American Southwest of Mexico, we're in Somalia and Yemen. The stakes are larger. It feels more global.
I think in Soldado, the military plays a bigger part in our story. Matt is a character who works in and outside of the government. In this particular case, he's working within the government. So the resources available to him are much more substantial.
This feels like a bigger mission. And then you bring in somebody like Stefano, who has his fingerprint on big scope things, and here he's been able to see his vision through.
The action in this movie starts with an incredible series of sequences where we're investigating the potential use of freighters to bring terrorists into America. And it leads to an incredible series of action beats.
Watching Stefano's work, what truly impressed me is that his approach to violence is very unceremonial. Unlike a lot of Hollywood movies where there has to be some major soundtrack, there has to be close up here, close up there, you know. There has to be like induced drama to it. He likes to play everything in long takes, and violence is just, it is what it is by itself. And that makes it much more cruel.
Stefano brought his visceral intensity to the film. The way he shows the violence is straight up. The violence comes at us like a tank.
Nice day for a drive, huh?
Ah, beautiful day. Blue skies, large caliber weapons. I love getting out of the office.
There's a moment in the film where when we shot it, it took days and days to get it right. We're supposed to bring Isabel to a rival cartel, and it's supposed to just be a simple drop-off, and it just goes horribly wrong.
Road isn't paved ahead. You got your thermal?
Yeah, in my bag in the back. You got
The idea there was to create a constant tension. So to have a long, really long scene when you know that something bad is gonna happen.
Oscar 1, incoming on your right. There, I see nothing. Contact right. I don't see anything. Oh, down, down!
The idea there was to be focused on the characters. So the most challenging part was to create the battle by adopting just the point of view of the people inside the vehicles. We decided to have just as a one shot during incredibly complex action sequences in order to keep the point of view on our character and without never losing it.
There was actually quite an elaborate shot, and we actually put a little rail inside the Hummer that the camera could actually track from all the way from the back to the close-up of the driver, pan through Josh, and then track back to Benicio.
I like very much when, more than on the action, you concentrate on the tension by being constantly with your characters during the action. I like also VFX, but I feel that putting an actor where you have a real explosion all around him really helps him in making the performance.
We had a big shootout. We had explosions going off. Stefano wanted to make sure it looked real. We discussed the ambush, what would the contractors do, and what vehicles would have been used, what weapons. The challenge was the vehicles coming in the right positions, the men moving, firing at the same time. Had a week of that, and it was kick-ass.
My favorite action sequence in the movie was the very ending where Matt is on a mission to find Alejandro. It's a lot of action work with the helicopters and the pilots. It's pretty amazing.
Dariusz Wolski, just the scope and vision he had for this, I think he did some of the best photography I've ever seen with the Blackhawks.
To synchronize two helicopters and land the helicopter on the freeway and shoot most of it from the air, that required incredible skill. I have quite a bit of experience because I've done a lot of helicopter work, and there is this incredible team of people here. The problem with Blackhawk is just they're like pickup trucks. They're not as flexible as a Jet Ranger. The camera ship is much more flexible, and to be able to fly straight and just go 180 and land in front of the car in sync while the camera ship is in there, very impressive.
It's pretty dangerous when a Black Hawk lands in front of two moving cars, and the stuntmen were driving that. And then men are getting out of a helicopter that the rotor blades are still turning.
When these Blackhawks are flying around over these cartel soldiers, that's us in it. There's no stunt guys. We're jumping out of a Blackhawk landing in the middle of a road, coming down from 500 feet in about 4 seconds.
I remember being there on the day, just in amazement of these helicopter pilots. It was just phenomenal work. And the DP, Dariusz and Stefano, their ability to capture all that. And what I felt standing there on set and watching, you feel watching it on the screen, which is always the goal.
Soldado's a great action movie with the bells and whistles in the scope, but at the same time, trying to say something.
You love that great storytelling still exists. This is a great story that you get to lose yourself in.
I always believe that a movie must entertain you smartly. Also, I feel it's not bad if after the entertain, the movie made you think a bit about the world that is around you.